matter what I'm working on, I'm going to be working like 80, 100-hour weeks on whatever it is. So I hope it's interesting and I hope it has impact. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to lose interest pretty quickly. I'm just going to move on to something else. But like, I had a friend and he could only run at a certain speed. He was a very fast runner, but he'd say like, if I run slower than this, I'm actually more tired. There's this thing about like, well, is there hard work, right? And so like, what? I don't really understand the concept. Like, I only work at like a certain velocity, right? Like, I can't tell if it's harder or easier. I just like work at a certain pace. So like, what does it mean to work hard versus just like work? And it's just that drive and that hunger to have an outcome. Just you get it. It's the best feeling in the world for me, right? Which is like, I have this problem or I want to create something and I'm just kind of going, and that actually amplifies as you have an organization, right? As you have an organization and like the organization is the work, right? It's like coaching people and hiring great people and giving feedback and just like helping people be more than what they thought they could be by seeing their talents and helping them unlock it, and then challenging them to do what they sometimes don't think they can do. That's another part of the work that is extremely rewarding.
Hey, I'm Brian Wish, and welcome back to the One Away Show. Today's conversation is with Ian Tien, CEO of Mattermost, technologist, creative thinker, and someone who's followed impact over ego at every turn. In this episode, Ian shares the one moment that nearly ended his life, but ended up giving him the clarity to start truly living. From a near-death encounter in a parking lot to a pivotal decision to leave corporate comfort and go to business school, Ian walks us through how he built a life centered around what matters most, literally. We explore the origins of Mattermost, the evolution from gaming to secure enterprise collaboration, and what it means to lead with self-awareness, discipline, and deep creative intent. This episode is full of hard-earned wisdom, thoughtful systems thinking, and a kind of calm confidence that only comes from living on your terms. Let's jump in. Ian, welcome to the One Away Show.
Thanks, Brian. Excited to be here.
Yeah, excited to have you here. Ian, thanks for joining me. And, the first question I want to ask you is, what is your one away moment that you want to share with us today?
Yeah, there's a lot that you and I kind of talked about, but I think that it's like, why go to business school? I think that was an interesting one. And, I got engineering, I did graduate school in computer science and went to Microsoft. And, the career choice for Microsoft, a lot of us say this out of college, like, I'll be at Microsoft for like 2 or 3 years or join big tech for 2 or 3 years. Then I'm going to do my own thing, entrepreneurial. And Microsoft just, it's got this culture that really sort of like brings you in and like kind of almost like changes what you value. And I was there, I think I was year 4, maybe getting close to year 5. And, I was just kind of like in there whole hog. And there's a moment that made me reconsider my life. And that's when I went to go to business school. But that moment that made me reconsider my life was probably the stupidest thing I ever did in my entire life, that made me almost die. And that was probably a moment. So.
Leave us on an edge. Why don't you? What was the near-death experience?
I was meeting my wife at a Chinese restaurant, and we shared my car. My car was a stick shift Toyota Celica, right? And this is what I had in college, and I was in my 20s in stick shift. And if you know what a Toyota Celica GT is, it's kind of like a Toyota Corolla they made into a hatchback, like same engine, right? Not super amazing, kind of like almost like a toy. And pulling into the parking spot of this Chinese restaurant, the parking spot was maybe, you call it like 4 or 5 feet off the ground, right? And I was standing on top of this concrete ledge, watching the car kind of park, and it's slightly sloped. So my wife shut off the engine, but didn't put the brake on. So the car starts sliding forward. I'm like, oh my God, my car. So the stupid thing that I did is I jumped down from that concrete ledge to like brace the car so that it wouldn't, hit the concrete wall and get damaged. But guess what happened, right? That car was way heavier than I thought. And I didn't slow it down one bit. And it was basically coming at me. I would be sandwiched between the wall and my car, and I would probably die. And then my wife, she hit the brake, and I didn't die. And she's like, what are you doing? Like, why did you jump down there? And, I'm trying to explain this, having my life sort of flash before my eyes. And, what I realized was I was in exactly the place that I said I never would be. right? I started off at Microsoft, this very entrepreneurial group. It was like super small. It was a startup within a big company. It was exactly what I wanted to do. Like right now, that thing is called Power BI, but it went through many sort of iterations. And we were the early days of Power BI, like 20 years ago. And I said, I'll do the entrepreneurial thing, but I never want to be in the big company. But when I was in that sort of near-death experience, I was in the middle of sort of like Hotmail and doing strategy stuff and product management. And it was like showing PowerPoint slides to executives trying to make a point and change the strategy. It was exactly where I didn't want to be. And just seeing the fact that like on my tombstones, like this person made PowerPoint slides, that's not how I wanted to live my life. So, I wanted to do something on my own. I wanted to start my own thing. And I went to business school to go do that because I didn't think chance was like super high coming out of Microsoft directly starting a business. So yeah, and that's how I decided to go to business school and decided to go and build my own thing and blaze my own path because if you're going to die, you might as well die doing something that you really love and enjoy and you find meaningful.
Wow. So just to, let me get this straight. So because of this moment in the car that was this near-death experience, was it the experience that really made you reflect on life? Is it like if you died, like would you want to be doing what you were doing, or like you had been feeling it up to that point, and that was just a catalyst? You know what I mean? Like what came first?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like boiling the frog, right? So you go to like Microsoft. I still love Microsoft in terms of the culture, the people there. It's an incredible organization, incredible talent, and and over time, it's like you get these performance reviews, right? And people are there are just very high performing, and you want to and what's in the performance review kind of becomes your value, kind of becomes your focus for the next year. You kind of make commitments every year and you start to and you get a high score. So they score people. I got something, I can't remember what it was. I think it was like a 4.3. It was like the top grade you could get. And after getting that, you're just like, okay, well, how do I get that again? How do I get that again? How do I get this this sort of stamp of approval? So I would really focus on what are the values that would get me that next high rating, and what's the impact I can have, in that organization. And ultimately, it led me into something that was again not what I wanted. It was like giving suggestions in a very small box, having ultimately very little impact. Like I could be there the rest of my life, and the odds that I would have impact on the bottom line of Microsoft or anything that mattered at that size of company was very, very low. And and I could just work my entire life and really not make that big of a difference in an organization that large. But because of performing well and performance appraisals and getting aligned to the priorities of that larger organization, that kind of became my life. I always whatever I do, I work a ton, right? So it doesn't matter if I'm working my own thing or working somewhere else. I just don't have an off switch. So I get super passionate. And then that sort of near-death experience just made me reset and be like, wait, what? I worked so hard. What do I actually want to do? So that was the moment for me.
Wow. And I appreciate the context and that makes total sense. And knowing you and, and all the good ways, like not having an off switch, but it's like, what mountain are you climbing? And, well, my question for you is you were kind of thinking about, hey, like you're questioning the mountain of Microsoft. You were like, I do want to go build my own thing, but you said, hey, business school needs to come first, right? And I guess why did you feel that, hey, business school would be a very smart way for me to kind of leap into something more entrepreneurial versus let me just go start the thing and then figure it out along the way?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really just sort of like, when I was at Microsoft, I started off in engineering, got a dozen patents, started building a lot of things, and I'm like, ooh, what else could I do here? And I moved to the business side. And I was in this group that had, that was doing a lot of online services. So what is now OneDrive and Outlook.com, I was in that group and got to lead some of those projects and initiatives. It's very strategy focused. We had a lot of MBAs. We had ex-Bain, ex-McKinsey, BCG folks, and, the very shiny MBA people. And I was actually managing MBAs, right? So I had, but what I kept finding with these MBAs, which is very different than engineering, they're like, oh yes, this MBA program was the best 2 years of my life, right? And people don't usually say that about engineering school. So what is this mysterious MBA thing that is the best 2 years of your life? And as I visited his campus and I learned more about it, it's this amazing, luxurious, very expensive time where you get to really sort of find yourself and think about like what's next and what's my future, and think about the decades and be with a cohort of human beings that are with you and just they're going through the same thing. They're like, what's the sort of like next half of my career, or probably next sort of 2/3 or 80% of my career, depending on when you went in there, and that sort of opportunity to step back, to really skill up, to think about the future in really deliberate ways, was really transformative for me. And I loved MBA so much. I actually took 3 years. I should end up with a public policy degree just so I could stay around, right? And in the first year of my MBA, I actually had our first daughter. And by having a daughter there, it's actually an amazing place to raise a very young family, because you've all these other like little kids and early families, and you have barbecues and there's play dates, and like the campus is set up where there's like a playground right outside your backyard. So it was just the most amazing, family-friendly, learning, luxurious experience that will and also, built your network and prepared you for the world. So if you're interested in that, yeah, that's I think the experience that I had.
Wow. That's really special. And I mean, it sounds like, not only did you get great people around you going through the same things that you're going through, so you had the built-in community, but you had the time to find yourself and like build a family. So there's a lot of like personal enrichment, right? Beyond just the classroom.
Yeah. I had this final year project. There's a friend that he's an investor, and he's just like, I want to run this independent study project where I think about the rest of my life, and I read a lot of books, and I go interview a bunch of people, and then I write an essay about my life, and I want to find a partner to go do that. Do you want to be that? I'm like, oh, sure. That sounds like an easy credit, and I did that, and it was really transformed for me. I'm so glad that friend invited me to go on that journey with him, because that project was so impactful, and even till today I still draw from what I was able to do. So and again, it's you have no money as a student, but like it's an extremely luxurious time. You have no income, right? But it's like, wow, I wouldn't trade that for anything. It was such a great time for me.
Yeah, it's like you feel super rich, but financially you're not rich at all. But you see the possibility. Do you mind sharing that project real quick? If you don't mind, I think I know what you're talking about, but I could totally be wrong. What that you mentioned that was.
I don't even remember. I think it was like a 356 project or something. It's an independent study. You pick a professor, and I had I think it was Jennifer Ocker, who's just a great like professor there, and it was a very just amazing project. It was another Jennifer Ocker or someone else. I think it was Ocker, yeah, or I might have had two advisors. I can't remember.
Got it. Okay, so I want to tap more into just business school. So it sounds like, yes, personal development. There's a lot of things to learn about yourself. But what were beyond kind of, because we're going to talk about Mattermost and kind of how that happened. But before we get there, when you look at business school at large, what would you say were some of the most surprising things that like you weren't expecting that came out of that experience as you look maybe back on now, that you're super grateful for, that maybe you didn't know in the moment kind of what it was going to help you with later?
Oh gosh, I think there's a saying which that like it sounds very shallow. It's like, oh, you go to business school for the relationships. And it's actually quite deep. You go to business school for the relationships that will really change your life and how you think and who you are, right? The friends that I made, the conversations I had, the people I got to keep in touch with really, really influenced me. And I think the most important thing is just how broad the world is, right? Like just everything from running a family business to doing private equity, to doing public market investment, to doing like tech startups, doing healthcare, to doing biology. And I think that in the business school, there's a lot of breadth. And in the university, there's sort of 7 schools of the business school that I went to, right? Like, sort of engineering and humanities, and just being on campus again with, just such a broad amount of research, like literally across the street. You're just like cross the street and you're like world class in this area and world class in that area was just a real, it was so lucky, such a privilege to be in that sort of community and have that the ability to go broad and think more broadly. Because if I stayed at Microsoft, which was, great in technology, I just was, you can go so deep in technology and all the different things. And you can spend your entire life, there, not really understanding very much of the outside world and not having sort of friendships and relationships that you can that you can use to open doors to learn about more. So it's sort of like, how does the well frog conceive of the sky? Right. And so I've got a bunch of friends who's like, I know what the sky looks like. And they can, whether it's healthcare or it's like, real estate, they can tell me what the sky looks like on in their different domains.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like Olympic Village, but for academics and industry, perhaps. So
Yeah, I think, I guess I don't,
I'm just like, it's like, what reminded me of, it's like, you look over there, you find world class here, you go over there, world class here. And it's like from Olympic Village, it's like, best in the world in sport here, best in the world in sport, and, all within a very close proximity is what I was picking up on. So yeah, it must have been super stimulating and, quite impactful for you. So one of the things in that, when I met with you for the first time and you're kind of sharing all the things, was how the name for your company came out of business school. And I remember kind of getting chills and for why you named the company you did and how kind of personally significant it was to you. So I would love, if you don't mind, for you to kind of share the story of, the name and kind of what's been born since.
Yeah, so I think so I've run a couple of companies, and what I try to do is find affordable URLs. I always want to own the .com for whatever I'm building, and the video game company called Spin Punch, and that was the first. When I came out of business school, it was a video game company called Spin Punch, and that was based on my favorite move in like Street Fighter 2, which was like a spin punch, and it was like 8 characters, and it was available. It wasn't very expensive. I think it was like $7 or something. So that was my first sort of URL. And then, when we ended up going to do sort of B2B software, sort of enterprise software. I needed a business name. Spin Punch wasn't sort of appropriate. So I really thought about one, it's got to be affordable, right? And I had to go buy a URL that wasn't, too expensive. And we were doing software that was for keeping so for running our own business, which was video games, and it had to be reliable, and it had to have it had to run our operations. So we picked the word Mattermost, and part of that came from business school. We had to get into the business school to apply, we had to answer this question: what matters most to you and why? So I'm like, okay, well, Mattermost, that's not a real word right now, but I think we could make that a brand. So then we found it for like not that expensive. It was hundreds of dollars, not thousands of dollars. And we bought the domain and we bought the .org, and that kind of became the name of our company. So, and it's really about what matters most to you and why. So think about like your business, or think about your operations and what is mission critical. So that's kind of how we came up with the name.
Yeah, awesome. And I love the name, and I think it's such an important question. When you had to write that essay, before we kind of talk about the business and the formation and the evolution of it, do you remember what you wrote about and kind of what mattered most to you?
Yeah, what better? Yeah, so in the essay, so we all wrote the essay, and like, not all of us totally remember what's in the essay because it was, a long time ago. And of course things change as you kind of go through school. But my essay was really about impact. And what I said was, at the end of my life, I don't really care about, what car I drive, how big my house is, what the bank account has. It's like, what did I impact in my life? And just framing from that point in my career, which is really mainly Microsoft, and sort of undergrad, I worked a whole bunch of jobs at like E-Trade, things like that. And it was, okay, here's the software systems I built, and here's what they do in the world. Here's like, I used to volunteer at Big Brothers, right? And I had little, I was the big, and what was it like to sort of be in that sort of program, and what's the impact that I just felt like such a sense of connection. One of the things that we do in our lives that impact others, that sort of ripple out, like sort of that, ripples in a pond. And that's what really matters to me. So not the house, not the bank account, all those things. It's what's the impact. And today at Mattermost, we work in national security, and I can't share, all the things that we do, but I would say that it's immensely fulfilling to know that we're making a difference in so many important operations that will kind of never really be shared and won't be. But it's, I think, and there's just a whole community of people that do things that are incredibly important, and they're not doing it for recognition. They're not doing it for glory. They're not doing it for money, but they're doing it because these are important things to do in the world. And that brand sort of Mattermost, that's what I think about when I think about the brand and our mission.
Yeah, like it sounds like leading from a place of impact has always been at the forefront of how you've done things. And on that note, right? I'm just curious. was the impact and kind of the mark you were going to leave on the world or your tombstone, were those conversations and thoughts that became more at the forefront, maybe later towards like that age that you were at in life, or were the things like growing up, right, that you saw, like family discussions, mom, dad, like what kind of influence that? Because some people, right, like go work on Wall Street, make a ton of money, and like call it a day, right? But for you, it's like there was more, breadth to maybe your thinking and depth, right? And I'm just like, what drove that for you to write that paper in that way?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, a lot of my sort of relatives were engineering and medicine and things like that, academics. I actually, just before this call, I was having lunch with the professor that just keep in touch over the years, and he was talking about like how the academics, a lot of people do research. You can imagine like any AI researcher today who's in academia could make tons of money out in industry, but just choose to do academia, to choose to do it, not really chasing after those dollars, versus doing something that you find is impactful and meaningful. And that's the thought that he shared with me. So as an example, when I was in high school and I was thinking I wanted to go to university, my dream school was the University of Southern California Film School, right? That's where George Lucas was. I loved film. I would, shoot like in the 90s, like, just the little, movies and editing and sound and doing all the things. And I was so passionate about it. And at one moment, my dad he doesn't interfere in my stuff so much, right? Like I was kind of raised by my mom. She kind of set the rules. My dad wouldn't do that. Wouldn't sort of like give input that often. But he basically said like, no, you can't go to film school, right? You have to find a trade. You have to like figure out how to like, get a salary, raise a family. And afterwards, after you have like security, then you can go and do your creative things, but you can't do creative things for a living. And for me, I was sort of like, okay, I mean, I didn't know any better. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just go to engineering school then. And that's kind of what I did. And that was an example of, and so for me, why film, right, is that film really changed who I am, changed who a lot of people are. It's the stories that really shape us. It's the characters, it's the narrative, it's the hero's journey that shaped us. And I found meaning in that. But when I went to engineering, I actually found meaning in the systems that we were building, right? So I did computer engineering, which is hardware and software. When I worked at Toronto Stock Exchange and E-Trade, I would work on software systems that human beings would use, and it would actually change the outcome of their jobs, right? Even though it's just consulting and doing this sort of small projects. When I was doing hardware and just like I actually was a teaching assistant for a digital systems course, which is like how do you program ASICs and how do you build these circuits? And I'm like, oh my God, like you're going to create this little machine that when you get manufactured, it's going to be in like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of devices doing this thing for everybody, and it's really going to shape like their experience. So every engineer, every phone that we use, every computer product, the webcams, like the keyboards, all these things are in machines, and you can have so much impact. So I think for me, engineering or filmmaking or any of these endeavors is really about what is the human experience on the other side. And that's how I think about sort of impact in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I guess two things. Your dad, probably was telling you that out of means to just protect you or just because he cared, right? And I could be wrong, but it's like parents want the best for their kids. And but it also sounds like, your creative acts, you've been able to find a way to like balance that with the structure of, discipline and, following that path, but then also being able to, evolve shortly after. And it sounds like in ways there's always a deeper burn for you to be able to explore that creative itch.
Yeah, I think it's just I just I work like it doesn't matter what I'm working on. I'm going to be working like 80, 100-hour weeks on whatever it is. So I hope it's interesting and I hope it has impact. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to lose interest pretty quickly. I'm just going to move on to something else. But like I had a friend and he could only run at a certain speed. He was a very fast runner, but he'd say like, if I run slower than this, I'm actually more tired. And he would just go right past me. Yeah.
And that's how you feel about work. You got to be running with things you care about.
I mean, there's this thing about like, well, is there hard work, right? And so like, what I don't really understand the concept. Like, I only work at like a certain velocity, right? Like, I can't tell if it's harder or easier. I just like work at a certain pace. So like, what does it mean to work hard versus just like work? And it's just that drive and that hunger to have an outcome. Just you get it, it's the best feeling in the world for me, right? Which is like I have this problem or I want to create something and I'm just kind of going, and that actually amplifies as you have an organization, right? As you have an organization and like the organization is the work, right? It's like coaching people and hiring great people and giving feedback and just like helping people be more than what they thought they could be by seeing their talents and helping them unlock it and then challenging them to do what they sometimes don't think they can do. That's another part of the work that is extremely rewarding.
Yeah, I remember on that note, I remember you telling me something about an employee that was so impactful for you and went off to go do something. I think you like helped pay for her like training or curriculum, or do you remember what you were sharing with me? It was like, I was like, I remember you telling me that. And I was like, that's just so, I mean, it sounds like just who you are, but it's just, it left an impression of like, I'm sure that's how you lead in everything you do. And, it's just as a aspiring leader that we grow in this, like, it's like, wow, like you do that leaves a ripple on the organization and the person you're impacting. So totally. And before we go back and get to from Fruit Punch or Fruit Bowl to Mattermost, what was the interest in like the creative act of film and the story side of it? Like what was the desire to go to film school?
The most amazing, like there's two kind of really amazing feelings for me. One is like telling a joke and having someone laugh on the other side. Like that's just a fantastic feeling. And what's amazing about film is that like you can kind of tell a joke or have like a an emotional sort of moment, and you can like reproduce that en masse digitally. And to be in a theater, like, because sometimes you screen at these theaters, and to have the audience have a reaction en masse to something that you created, an emotional reaction to something you created, is like, oh my gosh, right? Like that just it to feel that moment is just kind of incredible for me. So and you have that all the time right now. Like that was 20 plus years ago, right? And today you got social media and things are quick and you can do that all the time. But sort of back in the day, we had to be in a theater to like, have that kind of impact through like a medium, to have an emotional reaction, was a lot harder back then. It's a lot more common right now. But that's the same sort of like, that's the same sort of drive and experience for me.
Got it. Yeah. No, just curious and you seeing kind of what makes people tick and why, and kind of seeing what, interests you. So yeah, I appreciate the context. Ian, so you getting back to the company and business school, I know we're kind of jumping around here. You said it was Fruit Punch or Fruit Bowl? Like the initial.
Oh, it's like, did you ever play Street Fighter? Street Fighter 2? No, it's okay. It might be too old, but it's it's Spin Punch. So if you're like spinning, like there's characters that do like a spinning uppercut. So Spin Punch was the name of the company.
Okay, oh, sorry, Spin Punch. I don't know why I thought it was Fruit Punch. Spin Punch.
We get that all the time. Yeah.
So the Spin Punch. So Spin Punch evolved into Mattermost, is what you're saying. Okay, but it started out as a video game company, but then it became a security company. Is that?
Yeah, kind of weird story there. So we started off building Spin Punch, and we were using this sort of like chat-based service to run everything, because we had artists that were all over the world, and we had video game designers and all these other things. It wasn't a huge company, but we had a lot of freelancers, and we worked on a chat product. So we used the chat product to like do all of our art and automation and things like that. And this company that we were using got bought by a big company, and the software kind of got neglected. It would crash, it would have bugs, we'd lose data. It was really, disruptive. So we tried to leave. We tried to export our data. We had 26 gigs of data on the system, and they wouldn't let us export. So when we stopped paying our subscription, they paywalled us from our own information. Right, so all of our information, the whole system was in there, and they wouldn't let us take it out, and it wasn't a very quality service that we could continue using. So very frustrated, we said, fine, we'll just build our own. So we built our own. It was open source, and we built it for sort of small companies like us. And we're like, okay, if other people want to use it, great. We're building this for us. And then an enterprise came along that said, well, we want to use your software, and we'd like to get an enterprise version. And, we're like, and we'll pay you to add these capabilities that we need to run an enterprise. We're like, well, being ex-Microsoft, like, okay, kind of know how to build those. And we had a team that knew how to build those. So we're like, okay, fine, we'll build those. And then another big company came, and they kind of wanted the same thing. And then a government organization came, and they kind of wanted the same thing. So we're like, okay, there's a business here, like the market's speaking to us. And, at that time, it was sort of like 3 or 4 years in the video game business, and video games is 100 hours a week. But there's two things that may be like really exhausted from the video game business. One is it's a content driven business, content. So everything's micropayments. There's no subscription revenue. So your revenue is really as good as your next release. And it's sort of a hits driven business as well. So one, it's sort of like really unpredictable. So that's one. The second was you had to work all your holidays, because that's where you actually make all your money is on the holidays where like people have free time and they want to play these sort of free to play games and do these microtransactions. So it was really sort of exhausting. I mean, it's not the time that you spend, it's more that the unpredictability and then the working all your holidays. And now that so we transitioned over to the enterprise business. We call that Mattermost, and it's been great because like when our customers take holidays, right? Our customers do like release freezes during the holidays, and it's just it's just way better. And I don't think that people appreciate holidays as much as I do, because I used to work sort of all of them in with great intensity. So it's really cool to be be like, okay, that's like everyone's off on New Year's.
Yeah. And and just to build on that with Spin Punch, how long were you working on that before, like, give me a time frame, and then you kind of realize, hey, the schedule, this is exhausting. The way we make money is so too hard. Like, how long were you kind of working on that before it was like, hey, there's a better enterprise business within this that we can create?
It's funny thing. It's almost like Microsoft. It's almost like Boy and the Frog, which I didn't realize how tiring it was until I saw like the alternative business, which is like, wait, I can have recurring revenue and I can work with enterprises and I can like not work on my holidays. So it was kind of that revelation. I think it was 2012 is I think when we sort of started. We were funded by YC, went through the core program, and I think it was maybe 2016ish that we started selling licenses to Mattermost. So 3 or 4 years. We started, maybe the open source project overlap was maybe like 3 years in. We started doing the open source stuff.
Okay. Wow. Very cool. I mean, not a terribly slow transition. Sounds fast, and like you responded to the environment well. For those that don't know Mattermost, I mean, you described a security company. You're working with enterprises for like what you can share. I know you can't share a lot, but in the most basic terms, what do you do? Who do you do it for? Kind of, and how do you really support these clients with everything that you do?
Yeah, great question. So the world has kind of changed, and the biggest things that are on people's minds are geopolitical instability and rightly cyber threats. And we live in this world that's post-digital, which these two are really meaningful. So you see, no one really does bank robberies anymore, but cybercrime is way up, ransomware is way up. The next sort of conflict isn't really going to be tanks and guns, as people have seen. It's really going to be attacks on critical infrastructure, on power plants, on transportation, on manufacturing, on the things that make society run, and these are going to be digital attacks. So when you think about, well, what's actually safe from cyber threats, it's really in air-gapped operations, right? If something is really important, you don't want it to touch the internet. You can't touch the internet. So you have to run these enclaves or run these compartmentalized systems. And in there, that's where Mattermost does its work. So we do sort of chat operations, audio calling, screen sharing, systems integration, automation, and we provide this platform that can fit in those systems that don't touch the internet, so you can actually run operations in something that's like purely safe. And then we go sort of in between. So you can also do it outside, but most of the folks kind of start in that area. So you'll do what's called out-of-band incident response. So you got some danger, you have some threat. Well, we're gonna stay away from the internet. We're gonna do it in this area that's contained. Any sort of dangerous stuff will be in here. We'll have like malware detonation chambers attached to them. We can do cyber defense. We can do DevSecOps if you want to build software in a very secure environment. If you want to do critical infrastructure, a nuclear power plant, and you can do those sort of operations. So think about like a WhatsApp or a Signal or a Microsoft Teams or that sort of like workflow, but in something that can be completely separated from the internet.
Yeah. Wow. So what I'm hearing you say is, hey, this is it's a platform in a way, but it's a container in a way to kind of ensure safety for enterprises that are doing work with critical infrastructure. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. How do you communicate and run collaborative workflows inside of critical infrastructure?
Fascinating. So, I mean, I know some of this, but just for the audience here. So, Ian, here's a question I wasn't anticipating asking you. Given the way the company and journey and it has evolved and adapted, maybe what's the most interesting hire or the most maybe unexpected hire from a role perspective that you've had to make that maybe you just couldn't foresee given the nature of your business, the complexity of, and the risk involved? I'm just curious how you answer that question.
You mean the most interesting person we hired, or the most interesting like job description we've had?
Yeah, probably job description is what I was going for, even though I am curious on the human side. But yeah, probably from a JD perspective.
Yeah, I don't know. In the business that we have, it's pretty standard. I mean, looking for like engineers and salespeople and pre-sales. Like we do a facilities clearance, so a facilities clearance FSO, facility security officer. I'm not totally sure what the acronym means, but like, I think some of the governance and sort of federal compliance pieces. It feels pretty plain to me, but it might be different for other folks. I mean, for the video game business, that was super fun. I really liked having sort of like sound effects designers. That was really fun. Actually, in the video games business, the one that I loved the most was hiring Arnold Schwarzenegger voice impersonators. So we had like certain units that would sound like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and it was just super fun. I could do anything. You could build anything you wanted.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's like the very pre-AI days, but you were in front of the voice. So Ian, one of the things that I've noticed is like if I remember this from our first call. I mean, you have and I mean this. And I've met a lot of business owners, but I think the way you show up for calls, or communicate, it just feels very self-assured. There's like the way you deliver feedback and the way your just management style. Like I really resonate with it for whatever. Like it's distinct, and I haven't maybe been able to pinpoint exactly what or why. Like this, but I'm just curious. Like what has been what's allowed you to develop as a leader and develop the kind of management and leadership style that you have now? And then the part two of that question is like, how would you describe that style to somebody who's never met you?
Yeah, great question. I guess so. I think one is, when you're if a near-death experience being run over by your own car, I think you care a lot less about what people think about you or all that, right? Like I'm kind of like, okay, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm almost dead, right? So everything else is kind of gravy. So like, I just don't care that much about like the stuff that's, what do people think of me, da da da. And I'll just do what is kind of like intuitive and sort of natural. It's like, okay, do good things, say what you think, and that's kind of the approach I have. So one of the examples is on LinkedIn, right? I get this because we work with national security, and what I do sometimes is I very purposely do this. I kind of talk about sometimes like family. I talk about my kids. I talk about my life. I talk about funny things that happen. And I mix that with maybe call it, I've mixed it around. I've done all sort of like national security, like we're going to be at this conference and here's our new features. And I've gone everything from like 100 down to maybe, I think we're maybe down to more like 30%, because sometimes when you do like the work stuff, it feels like ad units. And what I learned, I can't remember the name of this person, but he was a great, he wrote a book and he told me this. He's like, people really care if you show up just sort of like yourself and natural, like another human being, and you're not coming at them with like an agenda, the things that you want to do. And so I try to mix it up where it's like, I don't know, 50-50, or even like, 2/3 personal, 1/3 work, or it'll flip over depending on like if we're releasing things or things like that. And I think that's actually much more effective in our world, because I've got to build relationships. I travel a lot internationally. I have to cross cultural borders, and I have to, work with people who don't really know me. And like, who is Ian? Is Ian a sales guy? Is Ian like an engineer? Like, what does Ian want from me? And to me, it's just like, well, let me just be like a natural person. So let me give an example. I saw this tweet once that had this like advice, and it was to give your kid a card that says essentially, it's like, hey, if you're ever afraid of telling me something, right, just bring me this card, and it'll remind me that, and it'll remind me that I promise you, I'm not going to get mad. I'm just going to work with you on a solution, like sign dad. right? I'm like, oh, that's really cool. So I knocked that out, sent it in, took a picture, and then put that on my LinkedIn profile. And that's something that's nothing to do with work, right? And but it got so much commentary and so much like discussion of like, oh my God, I want to do that with my kid. And it was a great sort of conversation of just being like a human being and thinking about your family. And here's a tool that I found useful. And I'd rather, have that kind of conversation with people rather than, oh, and then we can do collaborative work and we can do this and AI can do that. Like I'll do both, right? But I think being sort of like yourself and really think about how do you connect with other people and what can you share that could be of value for them. If you default to that, then you can sort of be yourself. And I think being yourself at work is so much easier because you don't have to pretend to be anyone else. And it can be really effective because if you're yourself, then the other people will be themselves and you can have deeper conversations, get to know people faster, build relationships, build trust. So, be yourself. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes a level of, to your point, getting to know you, like, to know yourself on a level where you can kind of show up as yourself. But to your point, it sounds refreshing, and you've been able to bring that into Mattermost. And my question to you off of that is, given then, okay, hey, you're like, I try and be myself. I try and balance it personal and professional, but like I just show up as me, taking interest because of who you are, right? And I heard a quote one time. It's like the leader of the culture sets like the leader of the culture sets like the energy of the team, something like in that vein. Like how much, given who you are, the people that you hire are also able to show up like that. Something out of you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. I'd say like there's a saying which is like the founder casts a long shadow, right? Which is at the beginning team, as you sort of build it, is you're selecting everyone. Like the founder's selecting the senior leadership team, and they're selecting everybody else. So the choices you make have a lot of impact. And I think people know me pretty well. And some things people say, it's like, wow, I can really give you feedback. Like you're actually asking for feedback and you're listening for real. I'm like, I guess I am. Like, I don't know how to do it any differently. So, and I think people have worked with others that are maybe a little less open, that aren't looking for feedback quite as much. For me, I'm an engineer. Ultimately, like people be like, no, you're a CEO. You have to do business stuff. Yeah. But I was trained as an engineer. And what an engineer needs is they have to do closed loop. Right? It's like, okay, we're gonna send out a signal, we're gonna watch what it does, and we're gonna adjust and update. So we're always gonna be closed loop. And the alternative being closed loop is open loop, which is like just do stuff and don't care about what happens, right? Just like don't take any input, just like keep doing stuff. And that's just like the recipe for disaster. So if you do closed loop in a business setting, right, the most important thing you have is you have feedback from human beings. Well, the best feedback you can get is if you're open and you're definitely non-defensive and you're listening and you show that you care about people's opinions, and you'll be open to be like, okay, I agree, let's go change it this way. Or you say like, I disagree, here are the reasons why, and here's why I think we should do it this way. But as long as you react to the feedback and you appreciate it and you can tell them, where you stand, then then they'll give you more feedback. So it's like, do you want to work in a closed loop system or an open loop system, right? Do you want to have access to the information? And if you do, you better, set things up so that people will continue to give you information. And here's the thing that I say to my team, which is like, do you want them telling you the information to your face or saying things behind your back? Because that's your choice, right? Like if they don't tell it to your face, they're just going to say it behind the back because they have stuff to say.
Well, that's fascinating, super insightful. It reminds me, this is more of a personal narrative or perspective, but before I go there, I have to imagine, because of how you are in that sense, engineering minded, but personal, the way you've maybe, I don't want to assume, so have you constructed your organization in a way like when that closed loop environment, so it is very process driven, or it is getting constant data points, like from a data driven way, like how is that kind of bled into how you go about decision making, within the culture, within customers?
Yeah, great question. So what I try to do is I try to do training myself. So I'll fly in, we're a remote company, so we'll fly in folks and then we'll do like a day or a day and a half. I find a day is pretty good because people get, time zones and things like that. And I'll try to do a day. I'll do training for like leaders and emerging leaders. And I'll typically use, see if I got it here. I got a book, which is High Output Management. I don't have a copy right now. But I'll literally just kind of go through it. And so there's high output management, there's outside in, there's other kind of these like textbooks, and I'll do like half a day on some of these principles of how do you do systems analysis, how do you do feedback, how do you do, what is the job of a manager, how do you have impact, how do you measure impact, all these sort of principles. And then once we have that, we have like a framework in which we can discuss things, right? So one of the examples of that is this concept of managerial leverage, right? Which is like, hey, how does a manager or a leader use a small amount of time to have a big impact, right? And one of the things is, and a lot of this high output management was based on was from Intel, and it was based on a lot of manufacturing process. So the concept is like you don't have to inspect every single thing, right? You can randomly sample and you can actually get quality that's pretty much the same as if you inspected every little thing. You just have to figure out like how much do you randomly sample, and you can get the same. So we went through like that in sort of like the training setting. And then we talked about the concept of random inspection as a type of leverage. So when we go in and do a review of like a strategy or a document or some piece, what I'm encouraging managers to do is randomly sample, right? To the right amount of random samples rather than review every single thing. So it makes reviews go faster. You can figure out the way to get the same quality. And now people don't get confused when you go to a meeting and it's like, well, I'm asking about these three things and I'm diving like super deep and then I'm done, right? People are like, what was that? And it's like, oh, it's random sampling. Because if you do full sample, you're going to be very shallow in your analysis. You're going to be very broad and shallow. You'd rather be deep and random. Right. So this is just like, and these are counterintuitive ideas that come from very firm, mathematics, but you got to train people to understand it so that you can use them.
No. Yeah. Yeah. The managerial leverage principle makes a ton of sense on the random sampling note. We were having a discussion in our leadership meeting this morning on how we're inspecting a number of metrics. And I did buy a high output management after we met or before. And I need to have Blair on our team read it as you're talking. But no, Ian, it sounds very disciplined. And maybe it's like the way when you communicate seems very disciplined and thoughtful. But it seems like it's backed by process with the room to be creative and just anyways, I've always admired it. I may have never shared that with you, but here I am telling you. Well, I know we have a few minutes to go. As we move away from work, and by the way, congrats on all the things with Mattermost that you've been able to do. But I'm curious. You said something earlier. You said I'm going to work, whether Mattermost, something else. I'm going to work 80 to 100 hours a week, nonstop, regardless. At least for foreseeable future. People like you and me. Don't slow down much. So my question to you is, okay, say Mattermost just for whatever reason, exit outcome, whatever it is, like in the next 10 years, if you could pick the next thing tomorrow, if you had to pick, like, where's your greatest maybe curiosity going right now outside of your day-to-day at Mattermost?
Yeah, I don't really know. I think for me, I'm happy where I am. I'm not really thinking about like I can't actually, when you're sort of like everything's kind of running well and you're happy and you kind of built this thing. I'm pretty happy. The maybe I'll teach at some point. That could be fun. Maybe I'll do some filmmaking. That could be like. But there's nothing I'm really sort of super drawn to. I think it's really just solve problems, right? Like there's a need that we see for our market, for critical infrastructure, for making the world more cyber resilient, more secure, more efficient. Being a force multiplier when you sort of don't when you have like gaps in talent, and that's just a really important. That's really important right now. So I don't know. I'm sure I'll find something, right? But like, if something were to take me away from this, I'm sure I'll find something. But I just like life is short, right? You never get your time back. So whatever you're doing, just work on something that's meaningful, right? And that's that's just how I think.
Yeah. So, by the way, I wasn't alluding to, hey, you're looking at the next mountain, but like, there might be an imaginative thought in the back of the head of, hey, that would be a fun mountain one day to summit. So no, I totally get it. And it sounds like you found meaning, you found work that's impactful, and you can make a big dent doing, some good stuff for the world while growing the people in front of you. Ian, is there anything I haven't asked you that you want to touch on? Maybe there's one more thing I could bring up, but is there anything I haven't touched on that you want to make a note on, or maybe add context to from the course of this conversation?
Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn for more dad jokes.
Okay. Yes, you do have a pretty personal LinkedIn. Ian, I know, I know you have a podcast, so feel free to tell us about that. People can follow you on LinkedIn. Best way to kind of connect, LinkedIn, and tell us about the show a little bit and where to tune in as well.
Yeah, so I do a show called Tools for Tech Leaders, which is really, I'm getting advice from great CEOs and founders and things like that. And I'm just sort of opening up for other folks like C-suites and tech decision makers. And I get like a lot of advice talks all the time. And this is sort of like, what if I hit record, while I was doing that? And what could I share out? And I think it goes back to like that thing with filmmaking or with like digital. It's that like, wow, I can learn something myself, but what if I had a way to sort of pass that on to other folks? And that's what Tools for Tech Leaders is. You can find us on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and LinkedIn. And it's just something that I find so like, I just do it without, I would do it without the social media and stuff. I just think that it's so much more fun to be able to share that out. And we do use, a lot of stuff that I learned from the podcast in Mattermost itself, just for like management principles, tips and tricks, tools and techniques. It's just super fun. And I hope that other folks would find value in that. So Tools for Tech Leaders, please check that out.
Awesome. Well, Ian, thanks so much for taking the time on a Friday afternoon to do this with me. Always enjoy our chats, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. So much fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The One Away Show with Ian Tien. What struck me most about Ian is how deeply aligned he is with his values, with his work, and with the people he leads. His story is a reminder that success isn't about titles or speed. It's about clarity, impact, and willingness to ask, what really matters most? From using filmmaking instincts to building connections to applying engineering principles to culture, Ian shows us that leadership is equal parts process and presence. If this episode sparked something in you, I'd love if you shared it or left a review. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and lead with what matters most.